Standing in the shadow of the Great Pyramid or gazing up at the intricate arches of a medieval cathedral, it's hard not to feel a sense of awe. How did ancient builders create such perfect structures without the blueprints, calculators, or cranes we rely on today? The answer lies in something far more subtle and profound, a hidden language of craftsmanship passed down through generations without a single written word. These master builders didn't need instruction manuals because they encoded their knowledge in the very stones they laid, the rhythms they chanted, and the symbols they carved. This is the story of how humanity's greatest architectural wonders were built not with words, but with silence. Think about the last time you tried to assemble furniture using nothing but a vague diagram, frustrating, right? Now imagine constructing something as precise as the Parthenon or as enduring as Machu Picchu using only gestures, songs, and the wisdom of your hands. Ancient craftsmen didn't just build, they embedded their secrets into every tool, every material, even the movements of the stars above. Sacred geometry whispered the correct angles. The flow of water revealed the perfect gradient. The cracks in a kiln's bricks taught the right temperature. These weren't accidents, they were deliberate, living lessons designed to outlast empires. So why does this matter to us today? Because these silent techniques are more than just historical curiosities. They're proof of human ingenuity at its finest. In a world drowning in information, we've forgotten how to learn without textbooks, how to teach without screens. But the past holds a mirror to our modern struggles, showing us that the most enduring knowledge often can't be written down. It's felt in the swing of a hammer, seen in the alignment of a shadow, heard in the rhythm of a chant. From the guilds of medieval Europe to the stonemasons of ancient Egypt, these unspoken methods shaped civilizations. And now we're about to uncover them, ready to decode the secrets hidden in plain sight. Let's begin. Long before the first pencil touched paper, master builders spoke in a language of hands, eyes, and instinct. Picture a team of Egyptian stonemasons shaping a pyramid's blocks, no written measurements, no digital models. Instead, a raised palm might signal the exact angle for a cut, while the tap of a chisel set the rhythm for the whole crew. These gestures weren't random, they were a refined system as precise as any modern blueprint. Even today, traditional stonecutters in some parts of the world still use these silent signals, passed down through generations without a single word written or spoken. But it wasn't just about efficiency. These non-verbal methods held deeper meaning. When ancient architects aligned temples with the rising sun or the North Star, they weren't just marking directions, they were weaving the cosmos into their craft. A single glance at the horizon could confirm a wall's alignment, turning astronomy into a living, breathing tool. In places like Karnak or Chichen Itza, shadows cast by obelisks and staircases acted like giant sundials, silently instructing builders where to place the next stone. The very movement of light became their instructor. And then there were the chants, across cultures, from the monolithic builders of Easter Island to the cathedral craftsmen of Europe. Rhythmic songs set the pace for work. The steady beat of a drum or the rise and fall of a chorus didn't just boost morale, it synchronized hands and tools, turning chaos into harmony. Imagine a team lifting a massive lintel into place, their movements guided not by shouted orders but by a shared melody. The rhythm told them when to push, when to pause, when to adjust. Music, in essence, became their foreman. What's truly remarkable is how universal these techniques were. A stonemason in ancient Japan might not have understood the gestures of a Mayan builder, but both relied on the same principles: observation, imitation, and the unspoken wisdom of the body. A master wouldn't explain how to carve a perfect joint, they'd simply demonstrate, leaving the apprentice to watch, repeat, and internalize the motion. Mistakes weren't corrected with lectures, but with a guiding hand repositioning a tool or a nod toward a better angle. Knowledge lived in the doing, not the describing. Even the materials themselves held silent lessons. A seasoned builder could read a block of limestone by running their fingers along its grain, sensing where it would split cleanly. The color of clay in a riverbed might reveal its ideal firing temperature. These weren't secrets written in books, they were understandings etched into fingertips and instincts. In many ways, the greatest teacher was the work itself, each project refining the skills of the next generation through sheer repetition. So the next time you marvel at an ancient structure, look beyond the stones. See the hands that shaped them, the songs that guided them, the stars that aligned them. These builders didn't need words to create wonders, they had something far more powerful, a language of action written in the very bones of the earth. Symbols carved into stone weren't just decorations, they were textbooks without pages. Take the spiral, a motif found from Neolithic tombs to Gothic cathedrals. To modern eyes, it might look like simple artistry, but to ancient builders, it was a silent lesson in expansion and proportion. Each curve represented the golden ratio, a mathematical principle governing growth in nature, from seashells to galaxies. By repeating this shape in temple pillars or labyrinth designs, craftsmen encoded a universal rule: harmony follows this pattern. No scribe needed to write it down. The symbol itself taught the builder's hand where to place the next stone. Then there's the lotus, blooming endlessly in Egyptian and Hindu architecture. Its petals weren't just aesthetic, they mapped the path of the sun, their number often matching the days of a lunar cycle. A builder tracing the lotus's form would unconsciously absorb the rhythm of the seasons, aligning walls to catch dawn's first light. Even fractures in stone were sometimes incorporated into designs, turning flaws into sacred geometry. A crack might become the stem of a carved vine, teaching apprentices how to work with imperfections rather than against them. Celtic knots offer another masterclass in silent instruction. Interwoven lines that never end weren't merely art, they were precise diagrams of load-bearing structures. The same patterns that adorned manuscripts also stabilized stone arches, their endless loops demonstrating how weight could flow evenly through a building. A single knot could encode the tension points of a bridge or the interlacing of wooden joints. No words could convey this as efficiently. The knot itself was the lesson, readable to anyone trained in its language. Mayan glyphs took symbolism even further. Behind the intricate faces and animals lay hidden formulas for vault angles and mortar mixes. A serpent's coils might illustrate the correct slope for a drainage channel, while the gaps between glyphs corresponded to the spacing of support beams. These weren't just stories or prayers, they were construction manuals in disguise, their meanings reserved for initiated craftsmen. To the untrained eye, a temple wall was a mural. To a builder, it was a step-by-step guide. Even colors held secret knowledge. The red ochre in Aboriginal rock art wasn't chosen randomly. It signaled the iron-rich clay best suited for tool-making. Byzantine mosaics used gold not just for grandeur, but because its reflectivity illuminated the exact spots where mortar should be thinnest, preventing cracks. Every hue was a deliberate clue, a way to teach without uttering a word. Why did symbols work so well? Because they spoke directly to the hands and the heart. A Fibonacci sequence carved into a Hindu temple's doorway didn't just state a number. It showed the body how to move, guiding the mason's chisel in a rhythm that felt natural. Symbols bypassed language barriers, allowing techniques to travel across cultures without translation. A Greek architect and an Inca stonemason might never share a spoken word, but both understood the spiral's message. This silent teaching wasn't foolproof, though. Symbols could be misunderstood, their meanings fading as generations passed. That's why the most vital designs were often placed in sacred spaces protected by ritual. A mandala in a Tibetan monastery wasn't just art. It was a vault of architectural wisdom, its patterns repeating only for those who knew how to look. The real secret wasn't the symbol itself, but the way it trained the eye to see the world differently. Perhaps that's the greatest lesson here. Ancient builders didn't just create structures, they created ways of seeing. A single symbol could hold 1,000 years of knowledge, waiting for the right hands to unlock it. And sometimes those hands weren't holding tools, they were moving to a rhythm, turning construction into a dance. Dancing might seem like an unlikely tool for building a temple, but for ancient craftsmen, movement was as precise as any measuring tape. In West Africa, drumbeats set the pace for laying bricks, each rhythm matching the tempo needed to mix mortar or stack stones evenly. Workers didn't just hear the rhythm, they felt it in their bodies, their hands moving in sync with the beat. A single drum pattern could dictate how many bricks to lay before pausing, turning construction into a kind of choreography where every step was calculated. The drum wasn't just keeping time, it was the foreman, the instructor, the silent guide ensuring no step or stone was out of place. Across the ocean, Native American builders used footwork to map out structures. Before a single post was raised, dancers would trace the outline of a longhouse with their steps, their footprints marking where walls should stand. The spacing between their strides became the spacing between support beams, their movements encoding proportions into muscle memory. This wasn't just ceremony, it was practical engineering. By dancing the blueprint, they internalized the design, making it impossible to forget. A misstep would feel as jarring as a misplaced beam, correcting errors before they happened. In Bali, sacred dances didn't just accompany temple construction, they designed it. The Legong dance, with its intricate turns and pauses, mirrored the layout of shrines, each gesture corresponding to a doorway's width or a statue's placement. Dancers didn't learn from diagrams, they learned by embodying the architecture, their bodies becoming living compasses. When they pivoted on one foot, they were marking the angle of a future wall. When they extended their arms, they traced the axis of a courtyard. The temple wasn't built first on land, but in the air through motion. Even in medieval Europe, cathedral builders used rhythmic chants to coordinate the lifting of massive stones. The cadence of a hymn would signal when to pull a rope or shift a lever, turning a chaotic effort into a smooth, synchronized operation. Without these shared rhythms, the delicate balance of a flying buttress could collapse. The sound of voices wasn't just spiritual, it was structural, a way to align dozens of hands and eyes without a single shouted order. What made these kinetic methods so powerful? Movement bypassed the need for explanation. An apprentice might struggle to remember written instructions for column spacing, but after dancing the pattern 100 times, their feet would know the measurement instinctively. Rhythm also created a shared language among diverse workers, no translation needed when everyone felt the same beat. And unlike parchment, which could fade or burn, dance and song lived in the body, passed down as long as there were people to move and breathe. The most fascinating part, these techniques weren't just relics of the past. In rural parts of Japan, carpenters still use traditional songs to memorize the complex joints of timber frames. The melody holds the sequence of cuts and angles, turning a tune into a three-dimensional blueprint. It's proof that some knowledge resists being pinned to paper. It has to be lived, felt, and danced into being. So the next time you see a centuries-old structure standing perfectly aligned, consider this. Its precision might not have come from a ruler, but from a rhythm. The stones didn't just obey the builder's hands, they obeyed the beat of a drum, the turn of a foot, the rise and fall of a chant. In a world without blueprints, movement was the ink and the body was the pen. Imagine spending 10 years watching, waiting, and practicing before ever being allowed to lay a single brick on a sacred structure. This wasn't just discipline, it was the ancient apprenticeship model, where knowledge flowed from hand to hand like a silent river. In the shadow of Gothic cathedrals, young masons began as mere observers, sweeping chips of stone and mixing mortar, while their eyes absorbed every flick of a master's chisel. They didn't learn from diagrams or lectures. They learned by standing close enough to feel the vibration of a mallet striking wood, by noticing how a seasoned carpenter exhaled just before making a critical cut. Mastery wasn't taught, it was caught through years of patient imitation. The genius of this system lay in its simplicity. Mistakes were minimized because apprentices weren't just told how to avoid errors, they witnessed the consequences firsthand. A medieval stonemason might spend 5 years carving practice blocks before being trusted with a piece destined for a cathedral's facade. Each misshapen attempt wasn't a failure but a lesson etched into the body. The grain of the stone, the angle of the light, the resistance of the tool, these weren't concepts to memorize but sensations to internalize. By the time an apprentice touched sacred stone, their hands had already memorized the craft. Trade secrets were safeguarded not by locked chests, but by layers of tactile experience. Japanese timber framers, for example, guarded joinery techniques by having apprentices work only on hidden structural elements, the joints inside walls, the beams beneath floors. The most critical details were never drawn, only demonstrated in context. A master might adjust an apprentice's grip mid-stroke without explanation, letting the body learn what words couldn't convey. This wasn't secrecy for its own sake. It was quality control, ensuring techniques survived intact across generations. The apprenticeship model also created a living library of adaptation. When Roman concrete workers encountered a new type of volcanic sand, they didn't consult a manual. They watched how their mentors adjusted the mix, then mimicked the rhythm of stirring, the pause before adding water. Knowledge evolved organically, with each generation refining the last's methods through subtle, unspoken improvements. A Venetian glassblower's apprentice might spend a decade handling broken shards before being shown how to gather molten glass, not because the skill took that long to learn, but because the eyes needed time to recognize the perfect viscosity by the way light moved through the liquid. Even the tools themselves became extensions of this silent teaching. A master wouldn't explain why a particular chisel was used for delicate foliage carvings. They'd simply hand it over at the right moment, letting the apprentice discover how its weight balanced differently in the palm. Tools were chosen not just for function, but as tactile instructors. The slight curve of a Japanese saw, for instance, taught the user to pull rather than push, preventing splintering through design rather than dictation. What modern blueprints might spell out in arrows and notes, apprentices learned through endless repetition. A Byzantine mosaicist didn't need written instructions for laying gold tesserae. Their fingers remembered the exact pressure needed to set each piece after pressing thousands of practice tiles into beds of wax. This wasn't rote memorization. It was knowledge sinking past the conscious mind into the muscles themselves. The body became the manual, with techniques surviving wars, migrations, and even the collapse of languages. Perhaps the most profound aspect of this system was its universality. From the shipwrights of ancient Phoenicia to the bronze casters of Benin, the same principles applied. Watch closely, imitate patiently, and let the work itself be the teacher. The cathedral rising stone by stone, the sword folded metal upon metal, these weren't just products of skill, but of a lineage of silent understanding passed like a torch through the generations. And sometimes that torch wasn't held in hands at all, but embedded in the very tools that shaped the world. A mason's chisel wasn't just a tool, it was a teacher. The slight curve of its blade, the wear pattern along its edge, even the way it balanced in the palm, all these were silent lessons in technique. Ancient craftsmen didn't need instruction manuals because they crafted their tools to be self-explanatory. Take the Roman plumb line, its bronze weight shaped not just for balance but encoded with the golden ratio. The way it hung taught builders the ideal proportions for arches and columns without a single word. Similarly, Inca stone hammers had grooves worn into their handles from generations of use, showing apprentices exactly where to grip for the perfect strike angle. These weren't accidents, they were deliberate design choices, turning tools into three-dimensional textbooks. Consider the Japanese saw with teeth that cut on the pull stroke rather than the push. At first glance, this seems counterintuitive until you use it. The motion naturally aligns the body, preventing the blade from buckling and leaving cleaner cuts. No apprentice needed a lecture on physics. The tool itself corrected their posture through feedback. Likewise, medieval European masons' chisels had subtly different shapes for soft limestone versus hard granite. A master wouldn't explain which to use, they'd simply hand the right tool at the right moment, letting the apprentice discover how the softer metal of a limestone chisel would dull too quickly on granite. The tools were the lesson. Even the wear patterns on ancient workbenches held secrets. A Viking shipwright's bench might have grooves worn deepest where adzes were sharpened most frequently, revealing the ideal angle for honing blades. The smooth depression where planks were planed showed the exact motion needed for a flawless finish. These marks weren't just scars of labor, they were maps guiding the next generation's hands to replicate the same motions. In some cultures, tools were even ritually broken in by masters before being passed down, their handles molded to fit the grip of experienced hands, creating a tactile memory of proper technique. The most fascinating examples come from materials science. Roman concrete workers used iron chisels that left tiny metallic traces in the stone. Over centuries, these particles rusted, creating a natural glue that strengthened the joints. Modern engineers only discovered this recently, but ancient craftsmen knew it intuitively, not through chemistry books, but by observing how their tools interacted with materials over time. Similarly, Egyptian copper saws embedded with sand particles became primitive diamond-tipped blades, their abrasive action slicing through granite. The tools didn't just build, they adapted, teaching each generation how to improve upon the last. Symbolism played a role too. In Tibet, ritual daggers used to carve wooden temple ornaments were never sharpened to a razor's edge, not because they couldn't be, but because the slightly blunt edge forced the carver to work slowly with greater mindfulness. The tool enforced reverence. Meanwhile, Maori adzes often bore spiral carvings near the handle, not just as decoration but as a tactile reminder of the wrist's rotation needed for the perfect cut. Running their fingers along those grooves, apprentices internalized the motion before ever swinging the blade. This silent knowledge wasn't foolproof, of course. When the Black Death wiped out master toolmakers in medieval Europe, some techniques vanished overnight, not because the designs were forgotten, but because the nuanced balance of weight and proportion died with the hands that understood it. Yet even in loss, there's a lesson. The true manual wasn't the tool alone, but the living tradition behind it. A perfectly balanced adze might survive centuries, but without someone to feel its heft and understand its language, it becomes just another relic. Today, we're rediscovering these principles in unexpected ways. Modern 3D printers can replicate ancient tools down to the micron, but engineers are finding that without the wear patterns, those subtle grooves polished smooth by generations of palms, the replicas lack the same intuitive guidance. It turns out the greatest innovation of ancient tools wasn't their shape or material, but their ability to teach without speaking. They weren't just instruments, they were mentors whispering across time to hands willing to listen. Ancient builders didn't just pick materials at random, they listened to them. A block of limestone wasn't chosen solely because it was strong, but because the fossils trapped inside told a story. Egyptian masons would run their fingers along the swirling patterns of prehistoric shells embedded in the stone, using them as natural roadmaps for where to strike. Those delicate fossil lines revealed the rock's hidden weaknesses, guiding chisels along paths of least resistance. The stone itself whispered where it wanted to split. Similarly, in Japan, carpenters selecting cypress for temple roofs didn't just assess straightness, they read the wood's grain like a language. The subtle curves in the growth rings indicated which boards would naturally resist warping, their fibers acting as built-in instruction manuals for placement. A beam installed with the grain facing upward, for example, would arch over centuries, compensating for future sagging. The material wasn't passive, it was an active participant in the building process. Even the color of dirt held secrets. In the Andes, Inca builders knew that clay with a reddish tint contained higher iron content, making it ideal for mortar that could withstand earthquakes. They didn't need chemistry charts, the Earth's palette was their guide. Meanwhile, medieval European masons sought out sandstone with visible quartz veins, knowing these sparkling threads would lock together under pressure like nature's own rebar. The best materials didn't just perform well, they taught craftsmen how to use them. A single glance at the way water beaded on a slate slab could reveal its ideal angle for roofing, while the resonance of a tap on marble indicated whether it was sound enough for columns. Some of the most ingenious examples come from failure. Roman concrete workers noticed that volcanic sand from Pozzuoli, when mixed with lime, created a mortar that actually strengthened underwater. They didn't understand the chemical reaction forming crystalline structures. They just observed that ships anchored near those cliffs left deposits that hardened like stone. The environment became their laboratory. Similarly, Byzantine architects realized that bricks baked in kilns fueled by certain woods developed microscopic pores, making them lighter without sacrificing strength. The smoke patterns left on the brick surfaces even indicated which parts of the kiln burned hottest, turning each batch into a lesson in temperature control. Perhaps the most poetic example is how Tibetan monks selected stones for mandala foundations. They'd strike candidate rocks with hammers, not to test hardness, but to listen. A clear, ringing tone meant the stone was free of internal fractures, while a dull thud signaled hidden flaws. The rock's own voice decided its fate. This wasn't superstition, it was advanced material science in disguise. The same principle applies to the massive cedar trunks used in Pacific Northwest longhouses, where elders would press their ears against the bark to hear the sap's flow, identifying trees with the tightest growth rings without ever making a cut. Nature's instruction manual didn't stop at raw materials. The Mayans noticed that termite mounds maintained perfect humidity levels year-round, inspiring them to design palace walls with similar porous structures. Viking shipwrights copied the flexible tendons of reindeer ankles when crafting rigging ropes, creating lines that stretched just enough to absorb storm stresses. Everywhere they looked, ancient builders found ready-made solutions if they knew how to read the signs. The real genius wasn't in inventing techniques, but in recognizing that the answers were already there, etched in bone, stone, and bark. This silent collaboration between craftsman and material raises a profound question. Did we stop seeing these lessons, or did the materials stop speaking? Modern concrete comes in uniform bags, its variability engineered out. Steel beams arrive with barcodes, not stories. But the ancient approach still holds power, not as nostalgia, but as a reminder that the best teachers often don't use words. They show, they whisper, they wait for us to pay attention. The pyramids of Giza don't just point to the sky, they converse with it. Each massive stone block aligns with celestial patterns so precise that on the summer solstice, the setting sun perfectly bisects the Great Pyramid's northern face, casting a shadow that once marked the start of the Nile's flooding season. This wasn't just astronomy, it was architecture in dialogue with the cosmos. Ancient builders didn't need written calendars when the stars themselves dictated their construction schedules. At Stonehenge, the heel stone's position captures the first sliver of midsummer sunrise, a phenomenon so reliable it likely signaled when to reinforce the monument's lintels before winter storms. The stones weren't merely arranged, they were programmed, their alignment serving as both clock and compass for generations of caretakers. But the real genius lay in how these celestial cues were baked into everyday construction. In Egypt, obelisks doubled as giant sundials, their shadows stretching across temple courtyards like clock hands, showing laborers exactly where to lay foundation stones. The shadow's tip at noon might indicate the ideal width for a corridor, while its length at dawn dictated column spacing. Sunlight became a living blueprint, adapting to each season's angle without a single chisel mark needing adjustment. Similarly, Angkor Wat's western gate aligns with the spring equinox sun, illuminating hidden carvings only on that day, a built-in reminder for annual maintenance rituals. The entire complex functions like a stone alarm clock, its architecture tuned to celestial events too significant to trust to parchment. The night sky offered even subtler lessons. Polynesian navigators built their Mari temples with coral slabs mirroring the Southern Cross, creating land-based star maps that taught celestial navigation. A novice could stand at the altar and sight along the stones to learn how stars shift with the seasons. Meanwhile, the ancestral pueblones of Choco Canyon engineered their great kivas to funnel moonlight through narrow windows during lunar standstills, marking 18-year cycles for rebuilding ceremonies. These weren't just observations, they were mnemonics, turning the heavens into a rotating instruction manual where every constellation's position held practical meaning. Why go to such lengths? Because celestial events never lie. Unlike human scribes, the stars don't forget or distort their message. A solstice sunrise will always hit the same marker if the architecture is sound. If it doesn't, the builders knew immediately that settling or erosion had altered their work. The sky was both quality control and teacher, its consistency allowing techniques to span millennia. When the Maya designed El Castillo at Chichén Itzá, they engineered its staircase to cast a serpentine shadow during equinoxes, proving the pyramid's alignment hadn't drifted since the last inspection. The cosmos didn't just guide construction, it audited it. This celestial literacy extended to materials too. Stonehenge's bluestones, hauled 150 miles from Wales, glisten with embedded quartz that catches the solstice dawn like a signal flare. Builders likely chose them not just for durability, but for their ability to amplify celestial events, a glittering confirmation that the stones were placed correctly. Similarly, Egyptian architects used rose granite for obelisks because its crystalline structure refracts sunlight into a distinctive halo at certain angles, creating a natural on/off indicator for alignment checks. The very rocks were collaborators, their properties selected to speak the sky's language. Perhaps most remarkably, these techniques weren't isolated. From the sun temples of Machu Picchu to the star-aligned monoliths of Nabta Playa, cultures separated by oceans and epochs arrived at the same realization. If you want knowledge to outlast empires, write it in the stars. The vault of heaven never burns, never fades, and never gets lost in translation. Its lessons are always there, waiting for those who know how to look up. Behind the towering cathedrals of Europe and the intricate wooden temples of Asia lay an invisible web of guardians, guilds, and secret societies who treated architectural knowledge like sacred texts. Medieval stonemasons didn't just pass down techniques, they wrapped them in rituals. A simple handshake could reveal whether a traveler was a fellow master, the grip's pressure and finger placement encoding centuries of trust. In China, carpentry clans required initiates to carve a perfect dovetail joint blindfolded before whispering the family's mortar recipe, not to hoard knowledge, but to ensure only those who'd proven their hands could understand its nuances. These weren't exclusionary clubs, they were quality control systems disguised as traditions. The Compagnonnage of France took this further with their Tour de France, a years-long pilgrimage where journeyman masons traveled to different lodges, learning unique techniques at each stop. But here's the twist, they couldn't simply ask for instruction. They had to earn it through cryptic challenges, perhaps assembling a complex vault model from memory or identifying a stone's quarry by taste. Each test was a living textbook, with failure meaning another month of sweeping workshop floors. This wasn't hazing, it was a filtration system ensuring only the most observant and dedicated could advance. When a master finally demonstrated how to calculate a spiral staircase's curvature using only a knotted rope, the lesson stuck because it had been earned. Secrecy served another vital function, protecting integrity. In an age without copyrights or engineering licenses, a guild's reputation was its currency. The Venetian glassmakers of Murano went so far as to confine their masters to the island, threatening execution for anyone revealing the secrets of crystallo glass. Extreme, perhaps, but their methods produced lenses so flawless they revolutionized astronomy. Similarly, Japanese temple carpenters used Kyuden oral traditions so closely guarded that even within families, key joinery techniques were only revealed on deathbeds. The fear wasn't just imitation, it was dilution. A poorly trained outsider using half-understood methods could collapse a roof or weaken a city wall, endangering lives and discrediting the craft itself. Oaths bound this system together. A medieval mason swearing on the Book of the Square wasn't just promising silence, he was pledging to uphold geometric truth, with mistakes considered moral failures. Chinese woodworkers' initiation rites included drinking tea mixed with sawdust from their master's bench, symbolizing that their bodies now belonged to the craft. These rituals transformed technical skills into sacred trusts, making shoddy work unthinkable. When a Gothic cathedral took generations to complete, every craftsman knew his stone might outlast empires. That weight demanded more than skill, it demanded reverence. Yet within this secrecy flowed surprising generosity. Guild halls housed mystery plays, where allegorical stories encoded construction principles. A character representing the arch might marry the pillar, teaching load distribution through theater. German stonemasons left mark stones with chisel signatures that doubled as stress test indicators. A crack through a particular mark warned future builders where reinforcements were needed. Even the famed Freemasons' symbolic tools, the compass for planning, the trowel for unity, were memory devices, their philosophical lectures hiding lessons on proportion and balance. The secrets weren't buried, they were camouflaged, waiting for worthy eyes to decipher them. This delicate dance between concealment and transmission raises a compelling question. Did these societies vanish or simply evolve? Modern trade unions still apprentice systems, and the three-letter marks stamped on skyscraper steel beams echo the mason's marks on cathedral stones. The tools have changed, but the ethos remains. True mastery isn't just about knowing, but about stewarding, and sometimes that requires silence. The strings of an ancient Greek lyre didn't just make music, they built temples. Craftsmen discovered that plucking a string at specific intervals produced perfect harmonic ratios, and these same mathematical relationships determined the height of columns in structures like the Parthenon. A lyre string divided in thirds might correspond to the ideal proportion between a column's base and capital, turning melody into masonry. The Greeks weren't just aligning stones, they were translating vibrations into geometry, proving that beauty in sound and beauty in structure sprang from the same universal principles. Halfway across the world, Tibetan monks took this concept even further. Before consecrating a monastery wall, they would chant precise tones while tapping the structure with ritual daggers. The sound's echo revealed hidden weaknesses. A dull thud indicated solid construction, while a hollow ring exposed gaps needing repair. This sonic testing wasn't superstition, it was advanced acoustics in disguise. The monks' deep, resonant voices acted like living tuning forks, their vibrations exposing flaws invisible to the eye. A single sustained note could diagnose a wall's integrity better than any modern ultrasound device. But why rely on sound when written measurements would seem more precise? Because pitch is timeless. A bamboo flute carved in ancient China that plays Middle C today would have sounded the same note 3,000 years ago. Unlike ink fading on parchment or languages evolving beyond recognition, musical intervals remain constant across millennia. The same harmonic ratios that guided Greek architects still resonate in concert halls today, proving that sound is one of humanity's most durable measuring sticks. This sonic wisdom manifested in surprising ways. Pacific Islanders constructing megalithic platforms would strike stones with wooden mallets, listening for complementary tones before placing them together. Stones that harmonized were deemed destined to fit, their acoustic chemistry ensuring physical stability. Similarly, medieval European bell makers tuned their foundry pits to specific frequencies, knowing the molten metal would remember these vibrations as it cooled, producing bells with purer tones. The act of building became a kind of performance where every material had its own voice waiting to be matched. Even the human body became an instrument. In southern India, temple builders used the length of a priest's outstretched arms measured while he chanted a sacred verse to determine the sanctum's dimensions. The time it took to recite the mantra established the rhythm for laying bricks, synchronizing breath, sound, and motion into a single flowing practice. There was no need for written specifications when the body itself could become a living metronome, its natural rhythms dictating the pace of construction. The most fascinating aspect of these techniques, they're not entirely lost. Modern engineers studying the acoustics of Mayan pyramids have discovered that staircases function as massive sound diffusers, channeling rainstorms into rhythmic patterns that mimic ceremonial drumbeats. Meanwhile, restoration experts at Chartres Cathedral found that striking its flying buttresses produces distinct tones corresponding to their structural integrity, a secret the original masons likely knew. These ancient builders didn't just create structures, they composed symphonies in stone, where every note held meaning far deeper than mere decoration. The stones still sing today if we know how to listen. Dry stone walls stand as silent marvels of ancient engineering, where every irregularity in the rock becomes a deliberate clue. In the Scottish Highlands, builders didn't just stack stones, they listened to them. A protruding edge on one boulder would naturally align with a concave hollow in another, like pieces of a colossal three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. There were no blueprints, only the stones themselves whispering how they wanted to fit together. The genius of these walls wasn't just their mortarless construction, but how they taught builders in real time. A misplaced stone wouldn't simply look wrong. It would wobble or refuse to settle, demanding correction before the next layer could be added. The wall became its own quality control system, where mistakes couldn't be hidden or patched over. The Incas took this concept to breathtaking heights at Machu Picchu, where massive stones interlock with such precision that not even a blade of grass can slip between them. But here's the secret: those seemingly perfect joints aren't uniform. Each contact point is slightly different, with tiny bumps and ridges acting like tactile road maps. A builder running their hands along a stone's edge could feel exactly where it belonged, guided by friction and balance rather than measurements. The stones weren't cut to fit a template, they were shaped to fit only one specific neighbor, creating a chain of unique partnerships that made the entire structure resilient against earthquakes. A single stone removed would bring the whole assembly to a standstill, like a missing word in a sentence. What makes these walls extraordinary is their built-in feedback system. Unlike modern construction where errors might lurk hidden behind drywall, dry stone masonry lays every flaw bare. A poorly placed stone immediately protests by shifting or tilting, forcing the builder to reevaluate. This instant correction transformed construction into a continuous learning process, where each adjustment deepened the craftsman's understanding of weight, friction, and geometry. The walls didn't just stand, they taught, their very instability in the face of mistakes serving as the ultimate instructor. The longevity of these structures offers another lesson. Many dry stone walls in Europe have endured for over 1,000 years, not despite their lack of mortar, but because of it. Without rigid bonding materials, the walls flex with freezing ground and shifting soils, their stones subtly rearranging themselves to maintain stability. It's a stark contrast to modern rigid structures that crack under stress. The ancients understood something we often forget. Sometimes strength lies in adaptability, not brute force. Perhaps the most ingenious aspect was how these walls encoded regional knowledge. In Peru, stones were shaped with slight outward tilts to shed monsoon rains, while in Ireland, gaps were left at the base to let winds pass through, preventing toppling during storms. The local climate wasn't written in manuals, it was baked into the angles and spacing of every rock. A wall in the Scottish moors taught different lessons than one in the Andes, each adapted to its environment through generations of trial and error preserved in stone. This raises a profound question. Did these builders discover their techniques, or did the stones reveal them? There's evidence that many dry stone walls began as simple clearing of fields, with farmers stacking rocks in ways that naturally led to stable piles. Over centuries, these accidental discoveries were refined into an exact science where every bump and groove had purpose. The real instruction manual wasn't held in human hands. It was written in the language of gravity and geology, waiting to be decoded by observant eyes and patient fingers. The legacy of dry stone walls challenges our modern obsession with standardization. Where we see irregular stones as flaws to be corrected, ancient builders saw them as unique solutions. A knobby protrusion wasn't ground away, it became a keystone, its very oddness making it indispensable. In an age where we mass-produce identical bricks and beams, there's wisdom in remembering that sometimes perfection lies not in uniformity, but in finding the hidden potential in each uneven edge. Now consider how another element, water, shaped ancient engineering in equally ingenious ways. Water didn't just quench thirst for ancient builders, it spoke volumes about their craft. The Romans engineered their aqueducts with slopes so precise they dropped just 1 inch every 100 feet, a gradient barely perceptible to the naked eye. But here's how they ensured perfection. They laid patterned tiles along the channel beds. When water flowed, eddies would form distinct swirls over these tiles if the slope was incorrect, nature's own error detection system. A single irregular whirlpool told engineers exactly where to raise or lower the course, turning liquid itself into a living level. This wasn't just plumbing. It was a conversation between human ingenuity and hydraulic physics, where every ripple carried meaning. Half a world away, the Khmer architects of Angkor Wat took water's teachings even further. Their vast moats weren't merely defensive barriers, they were mirrors polished to absolute stillness. At dawn, when the wind died down, builders would study the temple's reflections in the water's surface. Any distortion in the image revealed leaning walls or settling foundations long before they became visible to the eye. The moat became a giant spirit level, its liquid surface magnifying flaws that might otherwise go unnoticed for generations. Even the canal systems feeding these reservoirs served dual purposes. The speed at which floating leaves traveled between markers indicated whether silt buildup required dredging, while fish gathering in certain areas signaled optimal oxygen levels for preventing stagnant water. The entire hydrological network functioned as both infrastructure and instructor, but water's lessons flowed beyond maintenance. In Petra, Nabatean engineers carved channels so narrow that capillary action drew moisture upward against gravity, allowing cliffside gardens to flourish in the desert. They learned this trick by observing how certain rock formations naturally wickered moisture from underground streams. Similarly, Venetian builders noticed that algae growing on lagoon pilings followed specific spiral patterns corresponding to tidal currents. They began twisting their wooden supports to mimic these shapes, dramatically extending the structure's lifespan. Nature wasn't just providing materials, it was demonstrating techniques. The true brilliance of these methods lay in their self-correcting nature. Roman aqueducts incorporated sedimentation tanks where water slowed enough to drop impurities, but the tank shapes were derived from observing how eddies naturally sorted pebbles in river bends. When Byzantine cisterns developed cracks, engineers didn't just patch them, they introduced quicklime into the water supply. As the liquid seeped through fractures, it deposited mineral traces that illuminated the entire fault network like a glowing map. Water didn't merely expose problems, it revealed solutions hidden in its own behavior. This liquid wisdom extended to disaster prevention. After earthquakes, Japanese well diggers would monitor how quickly water levels rebounded in their shafts. A rapid return meant underground faults had shifted dangerously, warning of aftershocks. In the Andes, Inca engineers built trapezoidal doors in their canals because they'd observed that floodwaters passing through triangular openings created harmonic vibrations that eroded stone over time. The rectangular shape they'd used for generations was literally singing itself to pieces until water showed them a better way. Perhaps most remarkably, water's teachings transcended cultures. From the stepwells of India to the qanats of Persia, builders arrived at similar innovations by listening to the same liquid tutor. A Persian engineer and a Mayan hydrologist might never meet, but both understood that water pooling at a tunnel's curve indicated needed realignment, or that moss growing only on a channel's north side served as a natural compass. The universality of water's language made it the perfect teacher, one that spoke clearly to anyone willing to observe its rhythms. Now consider this: if something as fluid as water could impart such precise knowledge, what might builders have learned from its opposite, the unpredictable dance of fire? The answer lies in the kilns and forges where heat didn't just transform materials but revealed their deepest secrets. Ceramics hold secrets written in fire. In ancient Mesopotamia, potters didn't need written recipes for their iconic lapis blue glazes. The kiln itself recorded the formulas. Shards pulled from ruined workshops show gradients of color fading from deep cobalt to pale turquoise, each hue corresponding to precise temperatures and mineral mixtures. A master potter could read these fragments like a thermometer, knowing that the third tile from the left in the kiln's arch would always turn a specific shade when the mix contained 60% copper oxide. The broken pieces weren't trash, they were a library of heat and chemistry where every fracture line held data. Chinese kiln masters took this further by engineering their bricks to fail informatively. Certain bricks near the firing chamber's peak were deliberately made with a slightly different clay blend. At critical temperature thresholds, these sentinel bricks would crack in distinct patterns. A radial split meant maintain heat, while a jagged fissure signaled reduce flames immediately. These weren't flaws, they were the kiln's way of speaking. Apprentices learned to listen to the pops and creaks of expanding clay, recognizing that a low, resonant ping at dawn meant the glaze would mature perfectly by noon. The kiln didn't just transform clay, it taught through its very breakdowns. Even the placement of failures carried meaning. In Anatolia, potters arranged their wares so that sacrificial test cups sat at key airflow points. These cups, thinner and more porous than finished pieces, would warp or crack first, giving advance warning of hotspots. A lopsided cup at the kiln's rear corner might prompt the stoker to block a draft channel with a broken tile, redirecting heat like adjusting a sail. The entire firing process became a dialogue between craftsman and fire, where missteps weren't punished but studied. A collapsed vase wasn't a loss, it was a lesson in overhydration, its slumped form showing exactly how much water was too much. This philosophy extended beyond pottery. Japanese swordsmiths would bury blades in ash during quenching, not just to cool them slowly, but to read the patterns left by the retreating heat. A wavy Hammond line wasn't merely decorative, it revealed where the steel's crystalline structure had transformed, telling the smith exactly how long to polish each section. Similarly, Byzantine glassmakers observed that bottles left too close to the kiln's mouth developed tiny bubbles in predictable spirals. Over time, these mistakes became markers of ideal placement, with apprentices taught to stack wares where the bubble density matched their teachers' samples. The brilliance of these systems lay in their adaptability. Unlike written manuals that freeze knowledge in time, heat-encoded wisdom evolved with every firing. A Mesopotamian glaze recipe might shift subtly over generations as potters adjusted for dwindling cobalt supplies, their kilns producing slightly greener blues that still adhered to the gradient's logic. Chinese kiln bricks were periodically replaced, with new ones incorporating slightly different clays to respond to changing fuel types. The knowledge wasn't static, it breathed, flexed, and improved through continuous feedback. What's most striking is how these techniques scaled. Just as a single cracked brick could regulate a kiln's temperature, entire cities grew around similar principles of encoded failure. In Mohenjo-Daro, the carefully sloped streets weren't just for drainage, they were a city-sized kiln draft system, with every alley angled to channel monsoon rains into cleansing torrents that flushed debris toward collection pits. The layout itself was a lesson in water management, teaching each generation how to live with floods without a single word being written. From the micro to the macro, ancient builders turned heat's whispers into enduring wisdom. Walking through Mohenjo-Daro's meticulously planned streets wasn't just about getting from place to place, it was a masterclass in civil engineering. The city's grid layout, with its perfectly aligned drains and carefully sloped intersections, functioned like a three-dimensional textbook on monsoon management. Every brick-lined gutter, every slightly raised threshold whispered the same lesson: water must flow downhill, but not too fast. Builders didn't need written codes because the streets themselves demonstrated proper drainage techniques. A blocked channel would immediately flood a specific intersection, showing exactly where maintenance was needed. Even the width of the roads served a purpose. Narrower lanes in residential areas slowed rainwater runoff, while wider thoroughfares directed torrents toward the city's massive covered drains. The urban plan wasn't just infrastructure, it was an ongoing education in how to coexist with nature's rhythms. Venice took this concept and made it dance with the tides. The serpentine curves of its canals weren't whimsical, they were precise responses to the Adriatic's ebb and flow. A sharp bend near the Rialto, for example, creates a natural swirl that prevents sediment buildup, while subtle variations in canal depth produce currents that flush debris toward designated collection points. The city's layout evolved over centuries as builders observed how water moved through trial and error. A piazza that flooded too often might gain a slightly elevated foundation in the next reconstruction, its new height serving as a benchmark for future projects. Even the algae patterns on submerged steps became indicators. Darker streaks marked the average high tide line, guiding masons where to use more water-resistant stone. Venice didn't fight the sea, it learned from it, turning every wave into a teacher. What made these cities extraordinary wasn't just their functionality, but their ability to self-correct. In Harappa, another Indus Valley metropolis, bricks were standardized to a ratio of 4:2:1 dimensions that allowed endless configurations while ensuring replacements always fit. If a wall collapsed during floods, the scattered bricks became a lesson in proper stacking patterns based on how they fell. Similarly, Venice's wooden pilings, preserved by the anaerobic lagoon waters, developed telltale wear patterns that indicated optimal spacing for new foundations. The cities weren't static, they were living archives of accumulated wisdom where every repair added another layer to the collective manual. This approach transformed public spaces into classrooms. The stepped wells of Gujarat, for instance, weren't just water sources. Their descending geometric patterns taught villagers about groundwater depth and seasonal recharge rates. The number of steps exposed during the dry season indicated the severity of drought, while the speed at which monsoon rains filled the structure demonstrated that year's soil absorption rate. Even the carvings on well walls served dual purposes. Floral motifs marked ideal water drawing spots where the current was safest, while mythological scenes often pointed to hidden maintenance access points. The genius of these systems lay in their accessibility. You didn't need literacy to understand that a Venetian alley sloping toward a canal needed repaving when puddles lingered too long. No technical manual could rival the immediacy of seeing which Mohenjo-Daro neighborhoods stayed dry during floods because their streets had the gentlest gradients. Urban planning became a universal language, readable through the soles of one's feet or the reflection of moonlight on a canal's curve. Which raises a profound question. If cities could teach humans so effectively, what might builders have learned from nature's original architects, the animals whose structures predate ours by millions of years? From termite mounds to beaver dams, the animal kingdom held blueprints our ancestors were only beginning to decode. Termite mounds in the African savanna don't just house insects, they're masterclasses in passive cooling. The towering clay structures maintain a constant internal temperature, even as the scorching sun bakes their exteriors. Ancient builders in Zimbabwe studied these mounds closely, noticing how their intricate network of tunnels and vents channeled breezes and regulated humidity. The result, the ruins of Great Zimbabwe, where thick stone walls mimic termite architecture, staying cool without a single mechanical fan. The masonry isn't just durable, it breathes, with strategically placed gaps creating natural airflow that lowers temperatures by over 10 degrees. The termites didn't leave blueprints. Their homes were the blueprint, silently demonstrating how to harmonize with an unforgiving climate. Honeybees offered another lesson in efficiency. Greek architects marveled at how hexagonal honeycomb cells used the least wax to hold the most honey, a perfect balance of strength and economy. They adapted this principle to vaulted ceilings, where interlocking hexagonal stones distributed weight evenly, allowing for taller, lighter structures. The same geometry appears in the domes of Byzantine churches, where the honeycomb pattern isn't decorative but functional, reducing the need for heavy support columns. Bees didn't teach through lectures. Their comb simply existed as a living equation, waiting for observant eyes to decode its logic. Then there's the humble beaver, nature's hydraulic engineer. Viking builders studying North American dams noticed how interlaced branches created flexible yet impenetrable barriers. They adapted this weave for their wattle and daub walls, where pliable hazel rods mimicked the beaver's craftsmanship, yielding structures that swayed rather than shattered during storms. The genius lay in the irregularity. Just as no two beaver dams are identical, each Viking wall found its own balance between rigidity and give, learning from the animal's instinctive understanding of material and flow. Even the animal kingdom's failures became textbooks. Japanese carpenters observed that spiderwebs torn by wind often reweave themselves with reinforced silk strands at stress points. This inspired the Shimenawa ropes adorning Shinto shrines, their twisted fibers deliberately uneven to redistribute strain, much like the spider's adaptive repairs. Similarly, Inca stonemasons noted how llamas' wide-spaced toes prevented sinking into soft ground, leading to terraces with staggered stone projections that mimicked this stability. Nature's solutions were everywhere, free for the taking. If humans could humble themselves to learn from creatures without words, the most profound lesson wasn't just copying forms, but understanding principles. When Roman engineers studied how oyster shells self-repair by secreting layers of nacre, they didn't replicate the shell, they embraced its philosophy. Their concrete incorporated volcanic ash that reacted with seawater to form ever-strengthening crystals, a chemical echo of the oyster's wisdom. Likewise, Mongolian yurt builders took cues from bird skulls, using tension rings that, like a falcon's lightweight yet robust cranium, provided maximum strength with minimal material. This raises a haunting question. If nature's blueprints were so abundant and effective, why did some techniques vanish into silence? The answer lies in the fragile chain of observation and imitation. When the last stonemason who understood termite-inspired ventilation died, that knowledge didn't fade gradually, it snapped like a thread. A hive's lessons persist as long as someone watches the bees, and when that attention wavers, the dialogue between species breaks. The real tragedy isn't just losing techniques, but forgetting how to see the teachers that surround us. Now consider this. The same forces that erased these nature-inspired methods also threaten the survival of their animal instructors. As termite mounds and honeybees dwindle, so do the living libraries that once guided human hands. Perhaps the ultimate irony is that we're silencing the very voices that taught us how to build without words. Lost techniques whisper to us through the gaps in history, their absence as instructive as their presence. Consider Roman concrete, the miraculous material that hardened underwater and lasted millennia. When the last artisan who understood its precise mix of volcanic ash and seawater died, that knowledge didn't fade gradually, it vanished overnight. The Pantheon's dome still stands as a silent rebuke, its flawless integrity mocking centuries of medieval builders who struggled to replicate it. This wasn't just a recipe lost, it was an entire language of material science slipping through humanity's fingers. The irony, the recipe likely wasn't even secret. It simply existed in the hands and habits of practitioners who never wrote it down, assuming the next generation would learn as they had, through touch, taste, and trial. Oral traditions faced even greater peril. In the workshops of medieval Damascus, swordsmiths guarded the secrets of pattern-welded steel with rituals as precise as their forging techniques. A master might demonstrate the critical quenching process only while chanting specific verses, embedding the timing in rhythm rather than records. When the Mongol siege of 1258 decimated the city's guilds, those rhythms disappeared with the last breath of the murdered craftsmen. Centuries later, metallurgists would spend decades reverse engineering what had once been common knowledge, piecing together fragments from rusted blades and poetic allusions. The fragility of these unspoken traditions became their defining feature, each war, migration, or plague potentially erasing centuries of refinement in a single stroke. This vulnerability sparked ingenious countermeasures. Venetian glassblowers, fearing industrial espionage, staged elaborate deceptions. Apprentices were given slightly flawed tools, blowing pipes with imperceptibly misaligned tips or molds with one skewed angle ensuring any stolen techniques would produce inferior glass. The real mastery lay not in the visible steps, but in the subtle corrections only insiders knew. How to compensate for the tool's flaw by tilting the wrist 15 degrees, or when to blow softer to account for the mold's irregularity. These weren't just trade secrets, they were self-destructing instructions designed to crumble in the wrong hands. Yet modern science is now retrieving fragments of this silent knowledge. Archaeologists analyzing the mortar in Byzantine cisterns discovered traces of organic additives, chopped reeds and animal hair that acted as primitive reinforcement fibers. The recipe hadn't survived in any text, but the material itself remembered. Similarly, spectrographic scans of Damascus sword surfaces revealed nanostructures of carbon nanotubes, likely formed through repeated folding and forging of specific ore types. The sword's legendary sharpness wasn't magic. It was metallurgy so advanced that only 21st century microscopes could decode what the smiths had achieved through feel alone. Perhaps the most hopeful discoveries come from living traditions. In the floating villages of Tonle Sap, Cambodian builders still construct houses using ancient mortise and tenon joints that lock together without nails, a technique thought lost until researchers realized the elders were teaching it through seasonal rebuilding rituals. Each monsoon's destruction and dry season reconstruction became a cyclical classroom, preserving methods too fluid to pin to parchment. Similarly, the last practitioners of Mayan lime plaster in Guatemala revealed that the formula's key ingredient wasn't a material at all, but a specific lunar phase for mixing knowledge that had survived solely because the moon's cycles outlast empires. The race to recover these techniques isn't just about nostalgia, it's a stark reminder of how much we still don't know. When researchers recently tested Roman concrete in seawater tanks, they found it actually grew stronger over centuries, a property modern concrete can't match. The ancients weren't just building, they were engineering time itself, crafting materials that improved with age. Their greatest lesson might be this: some knowledge is too precious to leave unspoken, yet too complex to fully articulate. It lives in the space between words, in the weight of a tool, in the rhythm of a task repeated until it becomes instinct. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, it leaves behind just enough clues for us to listen. Laser beams tracing the surface of an Egyptian obelisk don't just measure dimensions, they listen to the stone's silent stories. Modern scans have uncovered microscopic chisel marks, revealing exact sequences of strikes, allowing archaeologists to reconstruct ancient workflows down to the order of tool changes. The grooves tell us that teams worked in rotating shifts, their hammers leaving distinct signatures like fingerprints in stone. A slight variation in angle near the base of the Luxor obelisk, for instance, suggests a master mason took over to demonstrate technique, his chisel biting deeper with fewer, more confident strokes. These digital autopsies expose the hidden rhythms of craftsmanship, turning silent stone into a time machine whispering across millennia. Machu Picchu's mysteries are unraveling through equally ingenious detective work. High-resolution 3D models have debunked the myth of perfectly fitted stones, showing instead how Inca builders used gravel beds as adjustable foundations. They'd lower massive blocks onto loose stones, then wiggle them into position like puzzle pieces settling into place. The gravel beneath would shift and compress until each stone found its natural equilibrium, creating those famous earthquake-resistant joints. This wasn't precision engineering, it was brilliant improvisation, using the material itself as a teacher. Modern engineers are now replicating this plopping method, discovering that the stone's slight imperfections actually enhance stability by allowing micro-movements during tremors. The Incas didn't fight nature's chaos, they collaborated with it. Some of the most revealing lessons come from ancient errors. At Göbekli Tepe, a misaligned pillar wasn't corrected. It was left standing as a cautionary monument. Tool marks on its surface show where builders abruptly stopped carving, realizing their foundation calculations were off. Rather than hide the mistake, they incorporated it into the sacred complex, ensuring future crews would see the consequences of rushing measurements. Similarly, Roman aqueducts feature repair stones with chiseled numbers matching specific construction phases, creating a breadcrumb trail of maintenance history. These weren't failures, they were frozen teachable moments, preserved in stone-like chapters in a manual where every flaw held meaning. The digital age is now resurrecting these wordless teaching methods in unexpected ways. Virtual reality apprenticeships simulate the tactile feedback of stone carving, using haptic gloves that vibrate when users apply incorrect pressure, a high-tech echo of the master's guiding hand. AI analyzes weather patterns at Angkor Wat to predict which temple sections will need reinforcement, much like ancient builders read cracks in mortar. Even blockchain technology is being used to preserve indigenous building techniques as digital oral traditions, ensuring they can't be lost to time or theft. Our tools have changed, but the goal remains the same, encoding wisdom in ways that transcend language. Perhaps the greatest irony is that we're circling back to ancient principles. Modern parametric architecture software mimics the Incas' gravel bed approach by testing thousands of virtual iterations before selecting the most stable form. 3D printed coral reefs grow like living stone, their structures adapting to currents just as Venetian pilings adapted to tides. The digital and the ancient are converging, proving that some truths about building and teaching are universal. They don't need words, just observant eyes and hands willing to learn from what the materials themselves have to say. Now consider this, if our technology is beginning to replicate these silent teaching methods, what might today's traditional builders, those still working with centuries-old techniques, have to teach us about preserving knowledge in an age of information overload? The answer lies not in servers or scrolls, but in the calloused hands of those who remember how to listen to the work itself. Virtual reality headsets might seem like the antithesis of ancient craftsmanship, yet they're resurrecting a tradition older than the pyramids. In Japanese timber framing workshops, apprentices now don VR goggles to practice intricate joinery, their digital chisels vibrating with haptic feedback when they angle a cut incorrectly, mirroring the subtle wrist corrections a master would demonstrate. Across the ocean, AI analyzes the brushstrokes of Mayan murals, detecting hidden geometric patterns that correspond to structural formulas for vaulted ceilings. The algorithms aren't just decoding art, they're translating a language of proportions that vanished when the last stonemasons of Tikal fell silent. What's fascinating isn't the technology itself, but how it's bridging a gap our reliance on written words created, returning us to learning through immersion rather than instruction. Traditional builders watching this tech revolution nod in recognition. In Kyoto, a fifth-generation temple carpenter observes VR trainees and remarks how the system replicates his grandfather's teaching method. He'd place his hands over mine on the saw, saying nothing. The pull of the blade taught me more than any diagram. Similarly, Navajo weavers collaborating with augmented reality apps find the digital loom's color prompts eerily familiar. They mirror the way elders once taught by pointing to dyed wool strands in sequence, their fingers tracing hues like a silent chromatic scale. The tools may be cutting edge, but the pedagogy is ancient. This revival reveals a paradox about human learning. For all our terabytes of data, some knowledge resists being digitized into text. An AI can diagram the exact angle for splitting slate along its grain, but it can't convey the moment a quarryman senses the stone's readiness through the tingling vibration of his hammer. That's why modern engineers are pairing laser scans with tactile apprenticeships, using 3D models to map cathedral buttresses while still requiring trainees to spend months carving soft limestone blocks, learning when the stone sings at the right hydration level. The future of preservation might lie in this hybrid approach, where LiDAR and muscle memory become equal partners. Traditional masters offer sobering insights about what was lost and what endures. A Balinese mask carver explains why he refuses to film his process. The camera captures the knife's path, but not the way my breath slows as the wood's resin scent changes near the heartwood. In Norway, a boat builder still seasons oak by listening for the creak of fibers settling, a sound no microphone has yet translated into usable data. Yet these same artisans embrace photogrammetry to document tool marks on Viking-era ships, recognizing that some silent lessons can now be amplified through technology. The most profound lesson emerges from comparing ancient and modern wordless methods. Just as Inca builders used knotted quippers to record engineering data, today's architects employ QR codes etched into stone, linking to holographic guides. Both systems store knowledge physically, bypassing language barriers. When a stonemason in Chartres taps a medieval mark with her smartphone to reveal its original purpose via augmented reality, she's not so different from her ancestors rubbing charcoal over carvings to highlight forgotten symbols. The medium changes, the conversation with history continues. Perhaps this digital renaissance proves something fundamental, that hands and eyes learned certain truths long before words could articulate them. As we teach AI to recognize the patterns in Khmer temple reliefs or the stress points in Romanesque arches, we're not just recovering lost techniques, we're relearning how to learn. The chisel and the algorithm, it turns out, speak the same silent language. In a small Kyoto workshop, a Shu-Sugi bandmaster runs his palm over a cedar plank, judging its readiness for the torch not by a timer, but by the way morning light catches the grain. His ancestors called this reading the wood's voice, a skill no manual could capture. As the flame licks the surface, he adjusts the angle instinctively, creating the perfect charred texture for weatherproofing. Across the globe, New Mexican adobe builders kneel in the dirt, pressing pinches of clay between their teeth. The grittiness tells them if the mix needs more straw. A chalky taste signals excess sand. These aren't archaic rituals, they're precision techniques refined over centuries, where the body becomes a living, measuring instrument. What makes these traditions extraordinary is their resistance to formalization. Attempts to document Shu-Sugi ban often fail because the true mastery lies in the artisan's peripheral vision. The way they detect subtle smoke color changes impossible to photograph accurately. Adobe recipes written down frequently produce inferior results. missing the tactile knowledge of how damp soil should feel when squeezed, a sensation builders describe as like a lover's hand, neither too firm nor too yielding. The paradox is striking. In our age of hyper-documentation, the most durable knowledge still flows through fingertips and tongues rather than keyboards. The survival of these methods reveals a counterintuitive truth about preservation. Japanese timber framers teach through Might Manabu, learning by watching, where apprentices spend years silently observing before touching tools. Mistakes are corrected not with explanations, but by the master redoing the action slowly nearby, a wordless invitation to mimic. Similarly, Berber earth builders in Morocco transmit techniques through communal singing, the song's rhythms encoding the proper tempo for tamping clay walls. These aren't just teaching methods, they're cognitive locks protecting knowledge from being extracted without the lived experience that gives it meaning. Yet this very strength creates an ethical crossroads. When a visiting engineer films the Shu Sugi ban process, should the artisan modify his technique to protect trade secrets or share openly to ensure its survival? The question echoes through workshops worldwide. Some Navajo weavers deliberately introduce errors in demonstrations a misplaced thread only initiates would recognize as false, while Venetian glassmakers notoriously falsified their furnace logs for centuries. The dilemma pits cultural preservation against creative ownership with no easy answers. Perhaps the solution lies in the methods themselves. In Oaxaca, mezcal producers have begun training apprentices through error gardens, fields where agave is intentionally harvested at wrong times or processed incorrectly. The resulting foul tastes and failed fermentations teach more vividly than any textbook warning. Meanwhile, Finnish shipwrights reconstructing ancient longships discovered that their most valuable manual was the boat's own reactions, how it groaned when planks were too rigid or sighed when sails balanced properly. The silent techniques endure not through stubborn secrecy, but by demanding the kind of deep engagement that transforms students into true bearers of tradition. This living knowledge challenges our digital age's assumptions about accessibility. A master potter in Ghana shapes vessels using techniques her grandmother taught through proverbs. The clay remembers the hand that respects it. No algorithm can yet translate this embodied wisdom into data points. Just as no video captures the way a Balinese dancer's footfall teaches temple builders the exact rhythm for compacting foundations. The silent masters remind us that some truths can't be streamlined, they must be lived, felt, and above all, earned through the patient dialogue between teacher, student, and material. Their greatest lesson isn't about hiding knowledge, but about honoring the sacred journey required to truly possess it. Now we face a pressing question. In a world that increasingly views information as common property, how do we balance the right to knowledge with the responsibility of stewardship? The answer may lie not in locks and keys, but in understanding why these wordless traditions endured when so much printed wisdom has faded. Guild archives from medieval Europe tell chilling tales. A stonemason in Florence blinded for revealing cathedral vaulting secrets, a Venetian glassmaker's hands broken after smuggling crystal recipes to France. These weren't just crimes against individuals, but against an entire philosophy, that craftsmanship's highest forms demanded exclusivity. Fast forward to today's maker movement, where open-source blueprints for 3D printed prosthetics and earthquake-resistant housing flood the internet. The tension between guarding and sharing knowledge isn't new, but our tools for navigating it have radically changed. Consider the irony. Modern archaeologists use crowd-sourced algorithms to reconstruct lost Roman concrete formulas, while traditional Japanese swordsmiths still withhold tempering techniques even from their own sons until initiations. Both approaches aim to preserve quality, one through transparency, the other through control. The case for secrecy often hinges on what linguists call tacit knowledge, the irreplaceable wisdom embedded in muscle memory and sensory experience. When French compagnonnage guilds required 12 years of apprenticeship before teaching the secret of twisting iron reinforcements into spiral columns, they weren't just being cruel. They were ensuring the knowledge settled so deep in the body that it couldn't be misapplied. Similarly, Navajo weavers protect certain patterns not out of spite, but because the precise tension in each thread connects to creation stories that lose meaning when divorced from their cultural context. There's a profound difference between having instructions and embodying understanding, a gap that's painfully visible when well-intentioned hobbyists replicate sacred Maori carvings from online templates without comprehending their tapu's sacred restrictions. Yet the open knowledge movement counters with undeniable victories. When engineer Lars Christensen released his 3D printable prosthetic hand designs online, it sparked a global network of makers adapting the models for local needs, from Kenyan farmers creating affordable tractor parts to Syrian refugee camps printing custom limb sockets. This democratization mirrors ancient Polynesian wayfinding, where star navigation secrets were traditionally guarded but eventually shared to prevent collective disaster. The ethical calculus shifts when withholding knowledge means denying clean water systems or medical innovations to those in need. After all, Gothic cathedral builders eventually published their geometry secrets in the 15th century, not because they stopped valuing craftsmanship, but because the Black Death had decimated the guilds the greater good demanded dissemination. Perhaps the answer lies in distinguishing between knowledge and wisdom. The Balinese water temple system, where irrigation techniques are taught freely but only activated after ceremonial offerings, offers a compelling model. The technical how is open, but the deeper why remains rooted in sacred responsibility. Similarly, modern open-source hardware licenses often require improvements to be shared, not unlike medieval masons adding their own innovations to the guild's collective knowledge while maintaining quality standards. The real ethical failing may not be in sharing or hoarding, but in divorcing technique from its consequences. When a 13th century master mason withheld secrets, he bore personal responsibility for any resulting structural failures. Today, an anonymously posted schematic can spawn 1,000 poorly executed imitations with no accountability. Practical wisdom emerges from this tension. If you're learning traditional techniques from online sources, seek out living practitioners not just for corrections, but to understand the cultural or practical contexts behind each step. When documenting family carpentry tricks or indigenous weaving methods, consider partnering with local custodians to preserve the accompanying stories and restrictions. And if you encounter secret methods in historical research, remember that sometimes the silence itself carries meaning, like the way Venetian glassmakers' deliberate tool flaws taught problem solving alongside skill. The choice isn't really between sharing and hoarding, but between transmitting information and sustaining understanding. After all, the pyramids weren't built by following instructions, but by generations of masons who knew not just how to stack stones, but when to listen to them. Look closely at the brickwork of an old church or factory. Those seemingly random patterns hold secrets. The zigzagging bond in Victorian walls isn't just decorative. It's a structural cipher revealing how load distributes across weak points. A header brick placed every fifth course might indicate where the original builders anticipated settling, while the subtle inward tilt of a chimney's flue bricks often mirrors the angle needed to optimize draft. These aren't accidents, they're silent lessons in material behavior, left by craftsmen who understood that future repairs would require clues, not manuals. Now examine the wooden beams in a centuries-old barn. The tree rings aren't merely aesthetic, they're a tactile map. Tight rings on the north side tell you this face endured harsher weather and should be oriented inward for stability. A knot cluster near the base, that's nature's arrow pointing to the heartwood's strongest plane. The builders didn't erase these features, they positioned them deliberately, turning imperfections into instructional markers. Want to practice decoding? Sketch the floor plan of your home, noting where walls meet at seemingly odd angles. You might discover that the 22-degree slant in your hallway aligns with the winter solstice sunrise, a passive solar trick borrowed from ancestral Pueblo designs. Or measure your ceiling's height to width ratio. Chances are it echoes the harmonic proportions found in Renaissance chapels, where dimensions were based on musical intervals known to reduce acoustic resonance. Even modern structures carry echoes of these wordless teachings. The overlapping shingle patterns on a suburban roof mimic the scale armor of medieval Japanese castles, each layer's offset calculated to deflect wind and water. Concrete sidewalks with deliberate expansion gaps follow the same logic as Inca stone joints, allowing movement without fracture. The silent manuals aren't confined to ancient sites, they're embedded in the everyday, waiting for those who shift from seeing to observing. The real test comes when you encounter something inexplicable, a strangely placed window in an old schoolhouse or a staircase with irregular treads. Resist the urge to dismiss it as a quirk. That window might align with a long-gone oak tree that once cast cooling shadows in summer, while the staircase's flaws could compensate for the building's gradual tilt. These anomalies aren't mistakes, they're conversations across time where the structure itself explains how it wants to be understood. So grab a notebook and measure the angles of your fireplace mantle. Count the brick layers between steel lintels. Press your palm against a plaster wall to feel where the texture changes. Those subtle shifts often trace the ghost outlines of original partitions. You're not just studying architecture, you're learning to read a language where every material, every joint, every imperfection holds meaning, the best part. Unlike ancient apprentices who spent decades earning these insights, you've got millennia of wisdom etched into the walls around you, free for the decoding. Start small, trace the grain in your hardwood floors or sketch the mortar lines in your patio. The silent teachers are everywhere, you just have to listen with your eyes. From dancing blueprints to self-teaching walls, ancient builders turned the world into their instruction manual. Their legacy isn't just about awe-inspiring monuments, it's a radical challenge to how we think about knowledge itself. In an age drowning in digital tutorials and endless PDFs, these masters remind us that some truths can't be pinned to a page. The Fibonacci sequence in a sunflower, the harmonic resonance of a struck bell, the way morning frost clings to certain stones but not others. Nature's lessons are everywhere, waiting to be read by those who engage all their senses. Consider this: when a 13th century mason carved a gargoyle, he didn't consult a weathering chart. He studied how rainwater streamed down the cathedral's walls during storms, then shaped the creature's gaping mouth to channel those torrents away from fragile joints. The building itself taught him where to place each grotesque, not through words, but through the silent language of erosion and flow. Modern engineers armed with fluid dynamics software arrive at nearly identical solutions, proving that observation and intuition can rival supercomputers when honed across generations. This silent wisdom extends beyond architecture. Watch a sushi master slice tuna. The angle of his knife follows the same organic logic as an Inca stone fit. A jazz pianist's improvised chords mirror the adaptive precision of dry stone walls, where every element adjusts to its neighbor in real time, the common thread. Deep learning through relentless practice and acute attention to feedback, whether from a misaligned stone, a discordant note, or a blade encountering unexpected resistance. Yet there's urgency in this legacy. As traditional stonemasons age and indigenous builders pass without apprentices, we're not just losing techniques, we're forgetting how to learn without words. The last practitioner of Maltese limestone repair recently died, taking his methods with him, because no one thought to document the way he could hear a wall's stability by tapping it with a spoon. Such losses aren't inevitable. In Bhutan, young architects now train by reconstructing earthquake-damaged dezongs using only traditional tools and the guidance of elder craftsmen. The rebuilding process itself becomes the curriculum, with each cracked beam and shifted foundation offering visceral lessons no textbook could capture. What does this mean for us today? Start by relearning the art of tactile observation. Run your fingers along the brickwork of an old factory. The smooth patches reveal where generations of workers brushed past, marking the most efficient pathways. Sketch the shadows cast by your home at different hours. You might discover the eaves were designed to block midsummer sun but welcome winter light. These aren't just historical curiosities, they're time-tested principles for sustainable living, encoded in the spaces around us. The past whispers to those willing to engage beyond screens and speech. It's in the way a seasoned gardener knows soil quality by taste, or how a sailor predicts storms from wave patterns that machines still struggle to quantify. Ancient builders didn't just leave us pyramids and temples, they left a challenge to reclaim the literacy of materials, the poetry of forces, the unspoken dialogue between creator and creation. Their greatest monument isn't stone, but a way of seeing where every crack tells a story and every material holds a lesson. The manual was never missing, we just stopped reading it. So the next time you marvel at an ancient structure, ask yourself, what is it trying to teach? The answer might not be written anywhere, but it's waiting in the curve of an arch, the whisper of wind through columns, the warmth of sun-baked stone. Some truths are too profound for ink. They demand to be touched, heard, and lived. And if you're ready to listen, the past has much left to say. For more journeys into history's hidden classrooms, don't forget to subscribe. Who knows what other silent teachers surround us, just waiting for the right student to come along.